All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Work 4.0 podcast. What was it? Yesterday. Was it yesterday? 2 days ago?
2 days ago.
2 days ago.
2 days ago, we hosted a lunch at our shared co-working space in Brooklyn, and we met this amazing guy, Karl, and we were like, we need to get you on this podcast. So 2 days later, here we are recording. We're about to dive deep. Karl Thomsen is a man of many talents. I was thinking through your background as I was talking, and it's really interesting. Karl spent quite a bit of time as a high school teacher. He has his master's from Yale in conducting. He's been a CEO of a tech company. He has been a senior vice president of people and coaching of a really amazing company doing really interesting things in coaching and learning and development. And today we really just invited him onto the podcast, giving him very little briefing about what we were going to talk about. So we're excited to discover what we talk about just as much as you guys probably are.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the invitation. If everybody read between the lines, my qualifications is that I ate lunch and said thank you.
That's right.
We're
That's
honored,
right.
honored to have you as our esteemed
I'm honored to
guest.
be here. Thanks.
Yeah.
Karl, could we start with your background? How the hell did you go from conducting to then getting into more of the corporate space to then becoming a director of corporate strategy? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think superficially, there are a lot of things that work against understanding that line. Seems pretty random. But if you'll think about what the role of a conductor is, it's absolutely what I've been doing in every role I've ever taken on. We're masters at understanding what to facilitate. Remember, we're not the ones that wrote the music most of the time, and honestly, our butts are to the audience, which makes us a little bit introverted, right? But what we do is compel and facilitate for others to bring out the best in them, so that the people behind you really are moved by what those people are doing. So whether that's conducting an orchestra, a choir, an opera, coaching a lacrosse team, coaching a football team, leading a people team, or being the CEO, I've always maintained that I still have the stick in my hand.
Wow. How did you, let's even rewind further. Who wakes up and is like, I'm going to become a conductor? How did that happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that happened, honestly. At one point, it was early on, I was involved in all kinds of sports and music in high school. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas.
Nice.
High schools were huge, right?
Yep.
And in those days, you could do a lot of things without having to specialize. Now, you kind of have to pick one or two. But in those days, I did everything. I was involved in music. I was involved in athletics. And my junior year in high school, my chorus director looked at me and said, you know what? I think you should conduct these pieces. You get it. So I did it once. And in those days, it was like, ooh, that's power. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Went to college, not for that. I got my first degrees are in metaphysics and legal theory. But eventually it came back around where that was pulling at me. And so I thought, let's go do it.
Like, I got to grab that stick again.
Yeah. So I don't know. What resonates with us that makes us aligned with things all our lives? We look back and we think it's accidental or serendipitous. And maybe there was just, an attraction or polarization there that didn't know existed.
I'm curious, you referenced a little bit that through line that connects all of the different roles that you've been in throughout your life. But when you think about your time as a CEO and director of corporate strategy and now a senior vice president of people, what are the biggest lessons that you use on like a daily basis that came from your time conducting?
That's such a great question. Let's talk about the mistakes, because I think that's where those things are revealed. When you take over as a coach or a conductor or as a leader, the pressure on yourself that you apply to become that guy, however you visualize it, is naturally disposed to being a poser, right? And you have to kind of pretend it, and you're faking it, and all of a sudden you find yourself disconnected to those things that you imagine in your head that you would be inspirational about. You're now not connecting. So regardless of what that role is, the leadership EQ, empathy, and the vulnerability it takes to go, where is this person coming from? How do I go there instead of making them come here, right? Which is not it's not unconventional, right? It's nothing earth-shattering, right? But the application of that is not easy.
Yeah.
And the discipline to apply that day in and day out is a lifelong journey. It's like training for a marathon. You know, it's never easy. Mile 20 to 26 sucks, right?
You're telling me I ran one marathon, and immediately afterwards, my friends at the finish line, I looked at them and I promised. I said, "Look, I'm promising, I'm never running again unless I'm being chased or I'm playing basketball."
It's rough. That last 10K is rough.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's rough, and it's funny. It's same with a half marathon. My first half marathon, that actually really surprised me. I was expecting a little bit with the marathon because I didn't have that experience, but I thought like as I would see the finish line, then I would have like the biggest jolt of adrenaline. But it wasn't actually. It was like psychologically, it started to feel like I was done.
Did
And
you
so then
tear
all
up?
the adrenaline. No, I didn't tear up at all.
I did.
No, I think I was in so much pain.
Yeah.
I was in so much pain and shock.
Yeah.
And then like I see the finish line, and then it's actually like that adrenaline started to wear down. Like it's my mind was like, oh look, I'm almost done. And then I started to feel all the pain, and it was like I thought I was sprinting, and I was like every ounce of energy I had,
Yeah.
and I'm like barely moving.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a testament to like the last 10% of anything we do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The first 90%, I think, was pretty effortless for me. I trained well. I was ready
Nice.
for it. I liked it, right? But the last 6 miles on my first marathon, I've only done 4, so it's not like I'm,
Only.
yeah. Well, there
I
are
did
people-
one and I retired.
There are people that, they do it all the time.
It's fair.
They're a lot skinnier than I am. But that last 10%, if you think about its application in rehearsal or in practice for a team or a game, competition, company projects, initiatives, that last 10% takes an enormous amount of discipline to push through and get the ball across the goal line. Just a lot.
I was running this morning. I was doing 4 miles, and I see where I was going to end off. And even that last half a mile, I was like, "Oh, this
Yeah.
is brutal." It's all relative.
It's hot today, too.
Yeah. Well, I go in the
He
morning.
did sneak in that he's running now.
That's right.
I'm not running right now.
Me neither.
It's never too late to get
It
back
isn't.
on.
No,
get back on your feet.
absolutely.
So-
Absolutely.
I'm curious. You mentioned wanting to start with the mistakes. What were some examples of mistakes relating from conducting to doing that with people and leading?
Oh man, that's a good question. I'm going to calibrate that against the fact that in a month and a half I turned 59. You're challenging my memory
Congrats.
now.
Yeah,
Thanks.
huge
Yeah.
ups.
Yeah, a year from now we'll celebrate something. I don't know. Is that really cause for celebration? It's
Yeah.
something. It's something. Yeah. So I think if we want to dig a little bit deeper on the certain mistakes, they all emanated from compensating for my inexperience. Because if you think about an orchestra, for instance, the people you're standing in front of probably have done Beethoven's Fifth 40 more times than you've conducted it, right? They have been there a while, they've been around the block, and this intense pressure you have to try to be the expert in the room because you're the one holding the stick. Let's apply that to being a CEO. You're not supposed to be the expert. I'm not supposed to be the best engineer, product man, designer in the room. I'm not supposed to be that. But the pressure for CEOs to feel like they should be, and they'll sit back and they'll absorb a ton of information. Successful CEOs are very good at extemporaneously speaking and thinking on their feet for the most part. And so they'll hear that and they aggregate that information, and then they put out initiatives and kind of govern it and edit it. And that you're one rung from making a fatal mistake now, right? Because you haven't empowered the people who are experts to be those experts. They're trying to sell you on their expertise, which now you've consumed 40% of their emotional tax? Right. And so those are the mistakes. I think you could, if I went down detail and listed in a Google sheet the actual line item mistakes,
Yeah.
I think you could categorize 90% of them to that mistake.
90%, that's huge.
They surveyed a bunch of CEOs. I just read about this. Guess how many felt a sense of imposter syndrome? Like what percentage?
Oh, I would say 99 and 1%
Pretty-
lying. That's what I would guess.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It was around 73%.
Yeah, and I bet 27% of them, how can we find out if they were actually telling the truth?
Right. I
They
think it
were-
was pretty generous for them.
Well,
to do.
and
Fair.
the other
Fair.
piece of that is what's interesting is I bet if you went to a high school and you asked them to think about who are some of the most confident and capable people in terms of type of role they have in society. CEO would be one of those they would rank pretty high as far as people they think aren't dealing with imposter syndrome. You've had a lot of work experience. You've made it to this point at the top of the ladder. You're doing like difficult things. Lots of people respect you. You're getting, highest pay probably around there of people in the building. And so like high schoolers would probably be like, oh yeah, you know what, CEO, probably not gonna have imposter syndrome then, but it's a testament to that aspect of our psychology, which is that really anytime you're doing something new that is different from what you have done a bunch of times in the past, if you're doing it well and it's really new and novel, there's going to be a piece of that. And it's not about trying to get rid of experiencing that in your life. It's about how do you relate to it?
Yeah.
And do you allow it to make you shrink and like pretend or like try really, really hard to compensate for it? Or can you relate to it in a way where you're like, okay, I'm gonna feel that. And I'm not going to let it deter me from what I think is the most right thing to do. And I'm going to look for resources when I can, and I'm going to find those opportunities where I just kind of need to trust myself and go exploring and just accept the uncertainty of it.
Yeah, the uncertainty is everything, right? Being able to face that uncertainty is everything. I love that you're pointing to some of that optics of what a CEO is, right? One, it's a pretty lonely world, right? Your input are by people who are highly incentivized to say what you want to hear. It's not healthy. So you have to work upstream to build a culture that is not that way.
How'd you do that in your time as a CEO? How'd you protect against that?
Yeah, I think there are some unique ways that we can attribute to people in being themselves. So I'm going to tell you how I did it. I don't know if this is formulaic for everybody, right?
Sure.
But one of my tactics, because it's largely true, is I will stare at my director of engineering and go, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Walk me through methodically what those logical principles are.
Yeah.
And I'll buy it, right? But just walk me through because I don't know. Look at me like I'm a first grader, right? And if you're okay with not knowing, and I have practiced putting myself in places I don't belong and learned. I love that feeling of being like, anxiety, don't know what the hell they think I do know. They think I'm charismatic and smart enough to know, and I don't. I'll just state it. Hey, look, I think you know this more than I do. Why don't you teach me, and then let me help you facilitate a different way to look at it as it applies to those people. And then all of a sudden, you're bridging gaps. You're building a culture where this person feels more confident, and more importantly, they're confident about how they approach you because they know you're not going to come in and with a bigger hammer, and one up them right? Ego is, right? That's our toxic.
Yeah. So
I'm not void of that, by the way, right? And we all struggle with that daily. Yeah, daily.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So leading with really inviting openness and expressing your own ignorance and actually claiming ignorance.
Claiming it. Because there are other ways that people facilitate what looks like that mechanism, but they're just platitudes. So I think that the genuineness of who you are is something you can't fake.
Yeah.
And although most people don't have the ability to articulate what they pick up on from your disingenuity.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Most people can't articulate that. They get it. They feel that about you. I remember specifically in 7th grade walking into a mall and seeing like a buddy of mine with other friends that I didn't know. And within 30 seconds, I had them sized up, right? We know whether we're able to articulate whether or not I like this person, they're going to, I can trust them or not, right? And that judgment, and it's a kind of a bad word these days, right? But that judgment is necessary.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Well,
the way
and
you
I
know
hear
how to
you.
calibrate.
I hear you naming the 3 cornerstones of trust that I forget the researchers that made this framework, but it's the one that we really operate with, which is when you're building trust, what you're talking about is authenticity. Do I believe that I experience the real you? Empathy. Do I believe that you care about me? Do you display care for me? Not say it, but in the way that you treat me.
Right.
And competence. Whatever thing I'm asking you to do, or I'm letting you do, or I'm tasking you with, do I believe that you can do it?
Right. No, that's right. I love that. That's a triangular cornerstone. I think that's right. And I don't know what the biggest piece of those 3 are. They work together.
Yeah, and they're probably different depending on the relational context.
No doubt.
right?
I doubt.
Like
I mean,
I wrote a letter from one of my best friends in the world. He had a baby shower last weekend, and he was one of the most authentic dudes. He was so quirky in high school. When we were 15, my best friend at the time was like, "Hey, I invited this guy." He was like in our history class, and I was like, "You did not invite that kid. He's so weird." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And then like we like walked around the mall like 15-year-olds do, and by the end of that day, I was like, half the things that this guy says are ridiculous and make me cringe, but he is so himself.
Yeah.
And he's passionate and he's honest about what he cares about. And he's kind of an idiot about a lot of things, but like I don't care. Like I don't need him to like fix my car or tutor me in social studies. Like this dude is so real and he cares and like he cares about me and like so quickly he became one of my best friends.
You know, that's so interesting because doesn't that drive the tolerance mechanism instead of the other way around? We'd like to speak about tolerance, but it's not driven by that. I'm tolerant of many things when I believe you. When I believe in you, I look at you and go, yeah, man, let's go. Let's give it a go, right? If I think you're disingenuous, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to start analyzing why do I not trust that person? And I'm probably going to underscore and highlight the things that are attributes you don't carry well, which we all have. We can justify any of that. But, you know, that tolerance of that kid, and I don't mean that's, you know, tight-roping, that word is an unusual thing.
Sure.
I don't mean it in that manner, but it could apply there.
For sure, for sure. And that's, I'm actually curious because as we're talking about like 15-year-olds and friendship, I can't help but also feel like I want to double click in your experience as a teacher.
Yeah.
So you were a conductor and a chorus teacher for over a decade in high school. Is that right?
12 years, yeah.
12 years.
I taught
So
a couple of other things as well.
what kind of things?
Physics and English for seniors. I coached lacrosse and I coached swimming there. I was the moderator for this group called the Bomb Squad. We were the St. Xavier Bombers.
Nice.
Go X, just in case any of you are out there. Unusual school, Jesuit school, all boys, about 1,600.
Wow.
That story is so important for me. Probably the least glamorous position I've ever taken. I certainly didn't go get my master's and doctorate in conducting to teach at a high school.
Sure.
Right.
Well, and from Yale. So
Yeah,
I'm
right.
thinking like, okay, you got your master's from Yale, and
Yeah.
then you went to a high school.
Yeah. Well, I got my doctorate from LSU in conducting. I taught at some universities and colleges, which is what I wanted to do. And then I went into, I started my own advertising agency after spending a year here with Bear Stearns in Manhattan. So I spent a year here, didn't like the finance game. Not because finance is bad, but I just didn't like who I was turning into doing that game.
Sure.
No disparagement for those of you guys who are rocking it out there in the
Hey,
finance
get
world,
after
man. But don't be a douchebag.
That's right.
You can edit that out. Sorry.
No, we'll keep that in.
We're going to dial that out.
So, to make a long story short, they enabled me to do what they perceived was, the guy's got multiple gifts, let's just let him do it.
Why'd you go there?
That's a very good question. I was in Cincinnati because I was doing this ad agency, and P&G is located there.
Sure.
So we were just had moved to Cincinnati, and there was the principal there was a graduate of Yale. We got connected through this and that, whatever.
Sure.
And he said at one point, super brilliant man, very good leader, was the principal there for a long time. And he said to me, well, they told me that at an all-boys school you can't really build, choir or music program.
Gave you a challenge.
Not only a challenge, I knew that was false. Right? I had been at enough places and started groups and took over groups where the growth was 3x. Not because I'm the most brilliant conductor, because I meant it. I meant what I was doing, right? And that's contagious. And man, you want to take high school boys that have to test into a school and show high aptitude and give them purpose, they will come. So my first year there, this is the greatest thing. 4 kids were in the choir. By the beginning of year 3, 250.
Hell yeah.
Bravo.
Out of those 250 year in and year out after that, 11 of those kids played in the NFL.
Let's go.
The
Nice.
diversity of that chorus, from the theater kid to the football kid to the basketball kid, we got each other, right? And if you can do that thing that you don't, it's not that you look for what you love to do, it's you look to love what you're doing right now, because you never know where that leads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No way Mr. Rogers thought that would lead to what he did,
Right.
right? And that's just secondary education. Primary education is what he was doing, right? Teaching an elementary school, right? And that turns into a fully syndicated show.
What were you doing in there? What was it that caused the growth to expand so?
That's an
so
excellent
much?
thing. Such a good question. There was a combination, right? I'm very competent at that trade. I love doing it. My favorite thing was analyzing why the music enforced what the poem or the words were saying, and then taking those and going, what does that mean to you as a 15-year-old kid?
Yeah.
How do we move ourselves because this is changing the kernel of how the lens of how we're looking at the world? And those kids ate that up. And I got to say this. I made a large impact at the school, and I hear that feedback. My son we moved back to Cincinnati from San Francisco. My son is going to be a senior there.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm serving on the board of trustees now. It's a weird
Nice.
turn of events, right?
Yeah.
But in that, I've heard feedback, wow, you made such an impact. And this is a cliche thing to say, I received 10x what I gave. I had a terrible high school experience. I grew up in a pretty abusive family, all that shit, And what I learned at St. X was like, oh, this was like a really good way to do it. I'm going to vicariously figure out those little demons that have been sitting in arrested development, right? And just, let's go, right? And it was fantastic. It was just one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
It was healing.
It was healing, right? It was healing, which only enabled me to be more passionate about what I believed in, right? And it changed what I believed in, right? It changed the way I looked at the world and kids and, oh, this could be this. And look at that kid. He's exceptional at robotics. He can barely sing. He needs to be in this group.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so
What was your last year there?
2014, maybe 15.
So I'm going to frame the question this way, which is in 2012, that was the first year that the majority of teenagers had smartphones and a social media profile. And so you were leaving just as that was really taking off, where now it has ballooned.
Yeah.
Where about a third of all teenagers have an anxiety disorder. The rate of suicide and depression has tripled. And so I'm curious, when you think about the state of being a teenager and our schools in particular, like what kind of thoughts do you come up for you when you really think about like what high schools are doing, the state of education, and particularly the impact on teenage boys?
Man, I love that question. I think this podcast is not that long, so I'm gonna try to curate this into really small morsels.
Awesome.
It's a passion of mine. Whatever manifestations of the illness of education we see right now, we started building that 40 years ago, right?
Can
Whatever.
you say more about that?
Yeah, sure. I think when we started to understand that a success metric for education became 1, grades, 2, a testing mechanism, and 3, your entry into what institution that held what kind of brand.
Yeah.
Once we started to calibrate against that, we saw a paradigm shift that governed the curriculum, right? Old cliche word, teaching to the test,
Yeah.
right? So what happens to a kid who is bright and gifted that it takes no effort to get to the 90? How many of those kids actually will go the extra mile to learn it at the level he could do?
They won't.
They won't.
They won't.
Why? Because we've inundated them with, you also have to work out all year for football. You also have to be involved in some kind of community event. You also have to have this profile, and this profile, and this profile,
Extracurriculars
right?
and stuff,
And then we're staring at this and going, look at those kids. They're doing way more than I did. I wonder why they have anxiety. Like the problem is not complicated in the source. The problem is, I don't know that we can put the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
Right? So something is going to have to disrupt education. I'm a heavy believer in education,
Yeah.
but something's going to have to come along and disrupt the way we look at education.
Amen.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I was a public school educator, and I
You were.
started off as a school counselor.
yeah,
And then I was training schools, elementary, middle, and high school. And it's really tragic,
It is.
particularly because the more that you look at the research and the science, we actually know certain things that we should be doing
We
for
do.
these kids, but it's such a big shift, and the inertia of the current system is so hard to change. That's why really we're so passionate about innovating learning and development within the workplace, is because there's a little bit less bureaucracy. You can be a little bit more innovative. You're not talking about a developing child. And so you can utilize some technologies, and you can really transform and set a new standard, because ultimately, rather than trying to fight the old way, you can build new ways And then you can trickle that into the education system. You can force them to have to change because you can build a better process. Like, look, this is how we've transformed learning and development at work. And so now you can't argue with that.
Right.
We need to do more of this within our schools. And so we really think about in all the work that we're doing and the products we build, the companies that we work with and innovating L&D, we're very passionate about also really being stewards and serving
That's awesome.
educational development.
The
I'm
service
curious if you
mindset
kind
is
of think
huge.
about it that same way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, the contained world of a corporation where there's no outside governance, let's say hypothetically the state,
Yeah,
where their large blanket application of what the curriculum ought to be no matter what your demographic or background is.
right.
Well, there's a miss. What if we did that in our companies?
Silly.
We wouldn't be successful.
Right.
And honestly, the leaders of the company would look at that development and the people mechanism as like, this is stupid.
Right.
Like, it's unnecessary. So I think there's a lot of parallels there.
100%.
Excuse me. I think it's exacerbated by the other things we've decided to value. How do we put the genie back in the bottle when we're paying teachers $50K? Are we drawing our best talent?
Right. Well, and the numbers going down as far as average
In relationship,
lifespan.
right.
For
I mean, the slope is still steadily going up because of inflation and the demand.
Yeah.
But it's not keeping up with that slope.
Right.
Right? The slope, I mean, honestly, we're sending our kids to $250,000 debt if you want to go to a good school, right? They're starting life with bad education support and then in debt, and then they're looking around going, how am I supposed to do this? And then we provide the solution at a cost.
And then we shame them for them
Right.
being angry and
Right.
feeling entitled and saying we need to change the tax system.
That's right.
And we say, no, come on, you just need to work harder. It's like, well,
Well-
we sort of set them up with a game board that wasn't true.
Right. And then you pull on that thread. It's like, oh, that's religion. Oh, that's politics. Oh, that's the NFL. Oh, shit, we're in a mess.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a cultural mess.
It is. It's a cultural mess. And we created that. Like, I know that it's very easy now to throw things over the fence and say, well, those people are saying that and those people are saying that. But it's like, hey, we're all complicit.
Yeah.
We watched this go by for years, knowing it wasn't the right way, knowing it wasn't best practice. We knew that.
Well, and we still are, but it's so overwhelming. It's one of those things like when if you show up to a dinner party and you try to talk to somebody about gun rights or abortion, then a lot of people are kind of going to, let's not talk about this here because it's so big. It's so overwhelming.
It's huge.
And that's what it is with the education system. It's become so complex and most people don't feel like they really understand what's going on in their kid's school, let alone the school district, let alone federal educational policy. And so instead we're kind of like, yeah, we just know it doesn't work, but it's so overwhelming. We can't bear to start thinking about it. And like the only way we change that is we have more groups of people that start to explore those hard questions together.
Yeah.
Because then when we're together, we can challenge and handle greater challenge together because you have some support and you can actually dig into it.
And that's your empathy piece.
Yeah.
Right? That's your cornerstone. Because it's not those people don't value education, which we could do in a broad stroke. There are a bunch of people who seem like they don't value it. The question really is, why don't they value it? And if I valued it, why didn't I share it in a way that they value it? Why didn't I reach them? Because I can tell you this, the people I reached as an educator came from all kinds of walks of life.
Sure.
Being moved and to move someone is not biased. There's no prejudice there.
Well, there's one variable that is the greatest predictor of teaching outcomes for a student in a classroom, and it's the quality of the relationship they have with that teacher. How much do I trust that person? Which means how real do I think they are? How much do I believe that they care about me? How good do I think they are at teaching?
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
It is.
trust.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely the same thing.
But meanwhile, what we don't train teachers in is anything about mental health or the science of trust building or nervous systems.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge challenge there. It goes very much in the same gaps that we don't teach managers of how do you actually build trust
Tell me about
with
it.
people that work with you so that you can have the relationship that then allows you to motivate and guide them.
Yeah. No, I think that's all so spot on, right? And we forget those while we're scaling.
Yeah.
We forget some of that while we're just frenetically, and hopefully when the calmer seas hit us, then you can calibrate and readjust and course correct, right? But in the chase for scale, which is inevitably the chase for revenue, right? If that's the North Star, then the byproduct isn't as healthy, right?
Sure.
What have you noticed when you see organizations that are hitting that level of scale, the ones that are able to actually exhale, regroup, see the calm and act like it, versus the ones that have really internalized these vicious cycles?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know that I have the precise answer to it, but obviously is, to borrow a really bad phrase, and it just popped in my head, was there is a trickle-down effect, and I apologize for the use of that term. I'm not a proponent, really. But there is, if the leadership group, which emulates the leader, however you identify that, whether that's founder, whether it's CEO, whatever that
C-suite.
right, that leadership group and maybe the next rung have to exemplify that. They have to demonstrate that that exhalation process it involves reflection, right? And in the judgment of how we are to move on, how we are to move forward.
What conditions do you see tilting the scales for leadership teams that are capable of doing that versus the ones that don't?
Oh, maybe greed.
Yeah, it's the incentives.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's incentivization. It's the promise of that life that every high school entrepreneurial club member thinks.
Yeah.
I want to be the CEO and entrepreneur because I'm my own boss. I get to tell, the reality is if you're an entrepreneur, you're everybody is your boss. I was going to say it a different way. I'll refrain from
Everybody's.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you
Well,
are.
it depends which entrepreneur you're talking to, I guess.
No, it's true. But if you don't have the entrepreneurial mindset and the intersection with a service mindset, you are probably going to fail.
Yeah.
Right? Or your successes might render you a lifestyle that looks good, but you have essentially failed in all the other regards. And maybe those aren't as obvious in optics. But
Yeah. And I was actually just talking to our team of interns a little bit before this, and they were talking about the lunch we were at and some of the conversations that they had and how they were learning more and more about product and the product development process, and how it's like this frustrating thing of like defining what you think is really going to work and then making sure that you don't treat it like your baby that people aren't going to give criticism to, that you have to always be learning and iterating. And that's the core of being an entrepreneur. You have to go into that service mindset of, I work for these people, I work for this problem, I work for this mission because I'm trying to just make things better, and I need to have access to the best information about what is needed here. And if I don't think about it like that, I'm not going to get all that information.
yeah. One of the biggest models for me that was in place, I was getting my master's degree, and there was a long-standing, huge reputation guy named Dr. Weston Noble at Luther College. Small college in Iowa, but a huge choir, successful choral program. And we were at Luther College, and he was running this little seminar, and he's a very funny man and gregarious, and had so much experience, he was just relaxed about it. But after the series of rehearsal, you saw him out in the courtyard picking up trash at the college because he had pride in it.
Wow.
And so I always thought to myself, can I pick up the trash here, or am I above it, right? Can I go out and pick up the trash? And so it's a nice exercise to think as you climb what we think is a ladder, right, and the responsibilities that come thereof, that humility is a pretty giant piece.
Yeah.
And you're not going to just get it and keep it. It's a pretty much daily thing. Like if I let it go, my ego can be a behemoth of an animal.
It's an entrepreneur who's able to actually be like water and go to the lowest places is actually closest to the ground level to see what's actually happening in reality.
Yeah.
And from that place, they're getting that information and that insight that if you're in an ivory tower making decisions that are disconnected from what people are actually facing and dealing with and going through, you're at a disadvantage.
You are, and you're severely disconnected, right? That's the manifestation of that. Here's the interesting thing. I bet there's 15 to 20% of us across the world that are talking about this very thing, that are compelled to take this apart, unpack it, and go, what are the problems? How do we solve it, right? And so the next issue is like, hey, this is the planet we want to be on. This is the planet we're on. Are we building the bridges to get to that planet? Or are we just staying on the planet throwing rocks? The voyeur community is huge.
Yeah.
Don't get involved, just throw rocks at that house, right? And I think that's a complicated level of that problem as
Right.
well.
It's a coping mechanism.
It
because the system is so daunting. It's like we're like a little speck looking at this massive entity and a machine that's moving that could crush us if we could run over us easily. So we cope by criticizing it, othering it, versus actually owning it and taking responsibility for the role that we play in it, and realizing that each of us has a capacity to do something about it.
We do. If we can be incidentally complicit, we can also be incidentally the solution.
Yeah. When you think about the future of work and the future of learning and development and leadership development, what are some of the things that are really important right now people might not be talking enough about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're heading into an opportunity to shift the paradigm in the way we look at the workplace. And here's what I mean. With the infiltration, and it's going to feel like an invasion and infiltration of AI.
Already does to a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. It really does. The fear. I was at a very large banquet, and the lady was like, "Oh, you're in AI." She was like, "It's going to take over our belief in God." I was like, okay. I can't even get into this conversation with you at this point because I don't even know where to begin. But what I can draw from it is it's indicative of the fear.
Yeah.
Happened when electricity came out, happened when the TV came out and the radio, right? It happened when computers arrived, right? I remember you guys are too young for this, but turn of the century, 2000, the freak out.
Oh, Y2K.
Yeah, Y2K, right? And
Clock is going to break everything.
everything was going to just fall apart, right? So I think we're heading into an opportunity where we can really focus on reclaiming what human ingenuity is. We have a population issue, right? We're overpopulated in a lot of ways. So the mundane operations processes that really less than humans can do, we're occupied by humans. And those people haven't been developed in their creative forces, right? Do I believe that all humans have the ability to think creatively? Absolutely.
It's in our DNA.
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. So we have not tapped that ingenuity. What we've done instead is quite the opposite, where we've identified people who are the gatekeepers for that, and the rest of us just follow the mechanism, right?
Yeah.
And I think AI, if they're going to take care of some of those more mundane mechanisms, we are either going to wither, right, as a workforce, and only the few will survive, which is our tendency, or we're going to figure out how to re-enliven, re-inspire us in terms of human ingenuity and how we look at the world and what we can add to the workforce. To look at a problem set and go, wait a minute, if I reduce this to first principle, what created this? What creates, instead of leveraging another platform or another thought, and now we're 4 generations beyond a solution, right? But go back to that, calibrate against that, and stare at the problem with our creativity. We're going to surprise ourselves, right? Yeah. Most of the time, I like to play the piano, and so when I sit down at the piano, I say if I play long enough, I get into my tunnel, right? Where I forget time. I don't know if I smell anything. You know what I mean? I'm just sitting there and I'm in this kind of flow where, look, I'm no Beethoven. So what I'm playing, I think is great, right? I think I'm fantastic.
Yeah.
But
You're the best musician in that room.
that's right. There's no doubt about it. And if my kids walk into the room, then I'm the second best. I'm good with it. But the point for me is I walk out of that experience with that much more of a higher appreciation of what I can do in my head, how I can manifest that physically. Now, how does that apply to my kids that I coach in lacrosse?
Sure.
How does that apply to the team at work? It's direct, right? And so, more importantly, if I can allow them to go into their tunnels, now we've got something.
How are you seeing companies take on the challenge of harnessing the power of AI to enhance human creativity?
I don't know that I've seen that.
How are you seeing AI further constrain creativity then?
Reliance, laziness,
Yeah.
right? Shortcutting it. We do a lot of this AI training, so unfortunately, a lot of our workers are pretty exposed to things. We have to offer a lot of mental health support
Really?
for what they're witnessing.
Yeah, could you say a little more what those AI trainings kind of look like generally?
Well, it depends on the client, and
Sure.
I can't get into the client
Right,
side
right,
of
right,
things.
right.
But fundamentally, like in terms of safety, those prompts that AI has to be trained.
Yeah.
Right.
Those prompts have to be calibrated and constantly educated,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And the initial prompts that people think are maybe anonymous, right? I mean, the things that they're witnessing are pretty severe, right?
Like what is, when you say you need to provide mental health support because when people see something, it starts to
Well,
shift.
whether it's a sexual connotation that comes out, or whether that's the ability to build a bomb, or whether that's
Oh, so you're talking about like the darkness that AI is emitting.
Yeah.
When people see that, it can shock their systems.
absolutely, right? And like everything else, if we find a really cool tool, our first tendency to go, how's this going to help me shortcut this? How can I write my paper?
Right.
Right, using ChatGPT, right? That's the human ingenuity is not our default anymore. I don't know that it ever was, so I don't want to say that these are the worst times we've ever. I'm not that guy,
Yeah.
right? And I'm certainly not prophetic enough to understand that fully, right? So no fear, I'm not going to Nostradamus you or anything like that.
Hey, I'd be curious what predictions you'd have if you were.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. No
What are we
doubt.
calling you?
I'll be sneaking that fortune cookie. So I think there's a temptation for laziness to prevail, right? I think that's probably normal in the initial onslaught.
Sure.
So I just want to see where we settle, right? Because we're going to settle. The manner in which we settle and the manner in which we do it, right? Not just that we're doing it,
Yeah.
but the care that we bring to it will dictate how we go.
How would you say, you're an insider, right? You're on the front line seeing how AI is being deployed and how people are being trained on it. And so we talked about the uninformed, like, oh, AI killed Jesus or AI, whatever.
Yeah. Whatever disparaging things we want to say about that.
What is your genuine greatest concern, or maybe we'll say worst fear about how this all plays out?
It's not going to affect me. I'm 58. All right.
Yeah.
I've carved out my own habits and paths.
Yeah.
Right. Of how I look at the world and how I execute the world. More importantly, how I execute. Right. I'm concerned for I have 2 granddaughters now. One a month ago.
Wow,
Yeah.
congrats.
So, that's why we moved from San Francisco to Cincinnati.
Beautiful.
My oldest daughter had our first granddaughter.
Wow.
And in that, it's amazing to me how much more concerned I am about the trajectory of things. I've always been concerned, but they've been somewhat academic,
Sure.
right? And as they get closer to my kids, they become less and less academic, right? But now, even just 2 more generations with grandkids, that doesn't become the next layer of understanding. That's exponential growth in your awareness and what we're providing for them. And so my biggest fear is that we've provided or poured so many of our resources into us not having to work at things. Like, okay, it's a great tool. It's going to make this easier. How else can I implement this thing where I employ my emotions, my intellect, my psychological aspects, and my physical attributes to become that holistic approach to being a human,
Yes.
right? And we've lost that. And you can see that gyms have exploded because people want to go work out and find that thing, right? Probably in a purist kind of way, there are plenty of those things to do without paying money to a gym,
Sure.
right? But we've lost those mechanisms, right? Out of convenience. And look, I don't disparage convenience. I watch TV. I'm on my phone a lot, right? I'm not one of those guys. That
Yeah, but
promotes,
really,
you know.
really think about it, and like, think about anyone that you've interacted with that retires or takes a lot of time off. You know what they don't do? Sit on their couch all day. That's fun for a little while, but eventually your psychology of who you are starts to kick in. And deep in our hardware, we are not set to just lounge around on a beach or on a couch all day. We need diversity of experience. We need challenge. We want input. We want to experience things. We want adventure.
Yeah.
We want community.
Absolutely.
And you can't just create leisure.
Right.
So we talk about this as the techno-productive optimism myth, which is the promise
Wait,
that
break that down again for me.
techno-productive optimism myth,
Okay.
which is this story that we've been sold, which says all we need to do is build technology that's going to make us more productive. It's going to help us share information faster and farther. And then we're going to do things faster. And then we're going to save a bunch of time. And then with all that time you're going to save, people's quality of life is going to magically improve.
More leisure.
But it doesn't work that way because
doesn't.
we end up becoming what we practice. And so when we're spending that time working, then what ends up happening is we're actually just filling more of that time working. So we're
Yeah.
working more hours now than we were 20 years ago when that promise was first started really getting made to us.
Yeah.
But then also, even the free time that we do have, we're now spending more and more time on our screens. People have higher rates of stress, depression. Our longevity of life has been going down. And so quality of life doesn't magically improve. It has to be at the design level and at the regulation level, how technology relates to us, how we relate to technology. It's not enough to just scale up how productive we can be. And ultimately, the other flip side of that is we don't want ultimate free time. It's not that we need to just create a whole bunch of free time. We actually need work now more than ever. We just need work to work.
Yeah.
We need work to be
Yeah, right.
functional.
Yeah, no, that's right. And throwing the responsibility of providing that free time onto technology is reversing the usage of a tool.
Right.
It's a tool. It's a mechanism, a vessel, right? And that's supposed to enhance how we think about, with my children when they were young, we didn't have we weren't very rule heavy. We just figured that if we did it the right way, the deviation from the rules would always kind of have this recoil back for them. They're going to go out and do those things.
Yeah.
And they're going to come back and be like, you know what? I feel that that's not right. Right. And that kind of mechanism was provided by, we guided them with, look, when you're in school, we want you to do one thing intellectual, one thing physical, and one thing artistic. Right. That's kind of what we governed.
Sure.
By.
Great.
Do those things because it's the aggregate of doing physical, creative, intellectual things. The
Yeah.
aggregate of those things, right? Start to develop your psychological ability to handle the world, right? And so if I'm thrown into the deep end of a pool, my first instinct for me is, okay, how do I swim?
Yeah.
Not what the fuck? You know?
Right. Well, because you've had enough experiences
Yeah.
where you have built your sense of confidence and ability.
Right.
And so your immediate response isn't overwhelm. Oh, God, I'm in a bunch of water. Now I don't know what to do. It's,
right.
oh, you know what? Even if I hadn't swam before, if you had done enough things in your life, you can see people that even when they're thrown in water, it's not like immediate panic. If you can build up enough confidence in your ability,
Yeah.
then you can avoid having that panic and overwhelm, and you can have greater capacity.
There's no doubt, right? And so anything that we don't like that we're doing now, we started that problem 40 years ago is what I always say. It's like, yeah, the problem is not now. We're just seeing its surface, right? What did we do 30, 40 years ago that started to plant the seed of this kind of laziness or this kind of anxiety or this, we've created these things. They didn't happen to fall out of the sky.
Can you talk about what you want the world to look like for your grandkids?
Yeah, what's your greatest hope?
Okay, I'll stay away from what I've been saying in the last year, which is like, hey kids, what if we just bought like 100 acres in Montana, build 5 houses, and in the center core of the houses, we're going to grow shit.
Sounds nice.
I know.
That
sounds nice.
It's not a really good ideal state. That sounds post-apocalyptic, right? Which who doesn't need a little Mad Max in their life? But ideal state is, I don't know. Gosh, I wish I had the kind of expertise to come up with that construct.
Or even when you just think about how they spend their 20s and what work looks like for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Let's talk about it separate from my kids because I happen to be biased about their ability to be creative at a level that they're going to succeed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to separate it a little bit from them.
Yeah, let's make it someone with a little less bias. That's
yeah,
fair.
Yeah. I think I need to think about less bias because one thing my grandmother's Korean, and she has said this several times when I was a kid. She used to say to people that were not really doing a good job at their work. We were in Texas. She would say, sorry for the broken English, but this is how she would say it.
Yeah.
Good thing you American. Being mediocre, you can still make it. And I used to be the first time I heard that, I thought, yeah, Grandma, yeah.
Savage.
The second time I heard that, I was like, yeah, there's some profundity there, right? Yeah. She's observing, pre-Korean War work ethic in Korea to coming to the States and going, what's going on with the laziness, right? And so I get that. And so I think ideal state is just everybody, I think in terms of absolute value, right? So deviation from the norm. I want my kids to maximize the positive of their absolute value.
Sure.
You know, I don't think of somebody extremely nefarious, malfeasant, an Adolf or whatever visualization. Then you think of the opposite world. They're the same gifts. They just went in different tangents, right? The array they decided to choose, like you're never going to understand the fullness of Gandhi by getting someone who absolute value skills only a 2 and he's a 20.
Sure.
Right? You're not even going to recognize those things. So for me, for my granddaughters, or for other kids, is to understand that they have a choice of which array they're going to kick off.
Yeah.
And if you're 1 inch off at the tee box, you're probably in somebody else's fairway, right? Later on down the road. So that calibration of like, what is true for my gift? How can I develop it? And how can I not be afraid to do that?
Yeah.
We are so shackled by our fear that we're not the expert coming out of the gate. Like kids are playing high school football and they just want to be Tom Brady, right? And it's like, you're not going to be that, right? So be your best right now. That might be holding the clipboard, dude, right?
Yeah, well, and the difference between panic and excitement is doubt. So fear needs to be present for excitement to exist.
Yeah.
So fear isn't an enemy. Fear is an asset.
Absolutely.
And so if there's something I'm afraid of, but I doubt my capacity to take it on, then I've got panic. I've got anxiety. But if there's something I'm afraid of, but I have some trust, maybe I'm with a team that I trust or a leader that I trust, or I have trust in myself that I have built, not that's ideological, but that I have built by giving myself evidence that I am the person that I think I could be.
Yeah.
That then when that thing comes up and I'm a little scared, I can take it on, and guess what? Now I have the thrill of adventure.
Yeah.
Now it's excitement.
Yeah, absolutely right. So the ideal state for kids, as you say, my 4 kids. I love, well, of course I love my kids. What a very Korean man thing to say. Of course I love my kids, but what I love about them, they're all very different. And probably on paper, if you were to put on paper labels of what they're doing with their lives. My oldest daughter started anthropology and English lit. That didn't get her very many jobs.
Sure.
Right? She's a natal intensive care nurse.
Wow.
Right? But even if you go through, what I love about watching them is that they get that fear. Right? They get that fear and they'll face it. And sometimes they won't face it. And then they'll come back and go, I need to face that. And that, I don't know if it's fortitude or integrity or an aggregate of several things like that, of that ilk. That's what I want for my kids. There's no way I can guess what the state of the world is going to look like. I'm 58.
Yeah.
And the amount of advancement and technological changes in 58 years since I was a kid, where I was only listening to AM radio and I was absolutely ball and chain to the telephone's length of the cord, right? And completely frustrated with how many 9s, 8s, or 0s somebody's phone number had for the dial pad, right? What I'm looking at now, right, in my phone, right? I've seen a lot. I feel like I should be 120 years old, right? And so there's no way for me to guess what that solid state is going to be, or what the climate or the environment's going to be for now my 1-month-old granddaughter.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know what's not going to change? Whether or not you face your fear, whether or not you are impassioned about what you're doing, and go for it with a little bit of reckless abandonment.
Yeah, it sounds
Beautiful.
like you gave your kids the space to feel that trust and that faith that they could do anything.
Yeah, sure. Let me just dive one level deeper before they all.
They're like, yeah,
Fucking
he
throw
sure,
right
he did.
We'll see them in the comment section.
If there were if there was an area that I made the most mistakes, it's that.
Okay.
Parents.
Okay.
Right? Parenting. I had terrible models, but that only becomes a good excuse for,
Right.
until you're like 25, when you really should like put your big boy pants on and go,
Right.
This is what I'm going to change and control. Right? But I made a ton of mistakes as a dad and earlier. I've made less, I think, as we went down the ladder, right? And some wisdom and age and like, oh, this doesn't go anywhere if I act like that. Same mistakes I made as a conductor, same mistakes I make as a leader, right? You think you're supposed to do this, do that. These are the rules. Don't do that.
Right, right.
And then you sit there like, wait, that came from a world where kids were never supposed to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Maybe Dr. Spock wasn't so cool, you know?
Yeah, you know, one of the greatest gifts of my life is that in my early 20s, I was thrust into some positions where I had to really help parents. And like, who the hell wants to take parenting advice from like a kid who's like 21, 22, who like thinks he knows a whole lot about psychology and parenting?
Yeah.
But one of the beauties of that was it humbled me so quickly, like almost necessarily, because I don't have any kids. So I would have to immediately off the bat be like, I'm not an expert here. What I can help you do is like explore some of your experience and help you figure out what you think is right. And I can give you some input on some things that are out there, but I'm not here to give you a roadmap. The roadmap exists, but it's being created in collaboration between you and your kid.
That's right.
And then
It's dynamic,
the
not
thing that
static.
just like shocked me, honestly, in my early 20s was every single parent is making so many mistakes, and that it is an essential and necessary aspect of the role.
Yeah.
It's impossible not to, because humans are so complex. And
Variables are way
you
too
have to
many.
make up the relationship while you're going. You have to start with a thesis like that's always transforming, and we barely really understand ourselves that well. So then to try to understand somebody else and be responsible for them, so like any lingering resentment I had towards my parents for things that they didn't do right, and like those stories so many of us tell in our teenage and 20s of well, I'm gonna do different. You did this, and it's like so much of that I could let go and just be like, oh look,
Oof.
those were people.
And you have kids, it's poof. Oh,
Right,
oops, I
right.
get it.
Right, so I got some of that early, and it was a great gift. But
Yeah.
like, you know, really, just what a hard time it is to be a parent, because at
difficult
least
time.
you know decades ago you got to feel like there was sort of a book. There still wasn't, but you got to sort of feel like you kind of knew what childhood was going to look like. We have no idea what childhood 5 years from now is going to look like.
No, you know, and the thing that makes it so difficult for me is I remember as a kid, even up to like my sophomore in high school, what did I really know or care about politics? Or honestly, for me, or even like sex. I just didn't really know all that shit. I heard about it. You talk about it in the locker room, right? But now they know so much. Where's the containment anymore?
Oh, by 2018, I was working in a school, and what I was astounded by was by December, every third grade girl had heard the word bitch.
Yeah.
It's like, what kind of world is
Right.
that? Like, I was like, wow, like how things have, and
They have
there would be
changed.
like second and third graders that were talking about stuff that I remember learning about in sixth grade.
Right. No, that's exactly
They're
right.
advancing really quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that exposure,
Yeah.
right? They get to a point where I remember, this is such a juvenile way to look at the world, but I remember in middle school, I was juvenile. There was like two girls that you were like, oh, they're growing breasts. They're like women, and all of a sudden I'm interested, right?
Yeah.
The maturity level of girls and guys now. They're 14 and 15, and they're getting more and more fully physically mature, and whatever you want to attribute to that to, right? That fast exposure, that fast growth, right? I don't know.
Well, and to your point, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
You can't.
Like there's an access to content and technology that is hard to restrict. We can put some boundaries on, and the work of Jonathan Haidt right now is highlighting a lot of those opportunities to really put boundaries back into childhood and not to give access to smartphones and social media. But even still,
Yeah.
they're gonna have earlier access, and so we have to figure out how do we build systems and settings around what they're experiencing better.
Yeah.
How do we actually create educational systems and support parents to be able to navigate more of those challenges and conversations?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, you go back from 2012 to 2020, parents were overwhelmed and in the lurch. There were no best practices, and social media, the correlation to depression, overdose, suicide has been immense amongst particularly teenage girls. And that's something that we sort of just left parents alone and schools alone for.
We did.
And so we need to rebuild and transform those systems to actually restore a sense of childhood. And it connects to our conversation about really like workplace L&D. It's
Absolutely.
a connection
It's
of
no
like
different.
the behavior science research. What does the research say is best practice? How can we build businesses and systems to support the players, the parents, the kids, the teachers, and actually build those sort of systems? And we need to do those for different things in the workplace, but having more of that integration. One of the lines we use all the time now is, what's cooler than generative AI? Integrative AI. Help us integrate all the great research that we've gotten from the last few decades and make it more implementable within our systems. Help us integrate all of this data and information and dashboards and content so that we can better empower some of our attention. Help us integrate more skills into how we're living on a day-by-day basis.
And integrate the humanness of it, right?
Yeah.
I think going fully Borg or data, if you're a Trekkie, right?
Yeah.
If you're a Trekkie, data, remember data? Yeah. I don't know that that's really the state. And in this, I love what you're saying here, because I think we get to a point where we're facing the issue of we're either going to go Amish, right? Where we just isolate ourselves and say, look, I've got to figure this out. No phones for my kids, right? Or we're going to judo it and go, let's use that force to redirect it in this way, right? So we can either isolate ourselves and go. There's a huge movement of that. I do not blame them.
Sure.
I don't do that, right? Because I love being in it.
Sure.
Right? But I don't blame them.
Yeah.
And just 20 minutes ago, I said we're all going to get some property in Montana. Right. That's Amishing that bitch. Right? Yeah.
That's easier.
And so I think there's an appeal for that, because it's like, how do we contain this again?
Yeah.
Right? How do we contain what used to be contained and is now there are no borders?
Yeah.
Right?
We another thing that we talk about, Karl, is how, you have somebody when you're getting into the workforce and you're an individual contributor, you're working on your stuff, and then someone's like, oh, you should manage this person now, or you're now responsible for this person, and all of a sudden you're responsible for somebody else's work and their deliverables. And I have a deep newfound appreciation in this conversation for the fact that as human beings, we are thrust onto this planet, we live our lives, and then you meet somebody, fall in love, you have a kid, and now all of a sudden you're now responsible for a new human. And the parallel to management and leadership alongside parenting and relating and being a familial leader is we're not parents, and Matt has worked with a lot of parents and students. I haven't personally. I'm seeing my friends deal with it, but there's such a parallel here, and I have, my heart really goes out to all of my friends who are parents right now, to be able to lead their families through this massive shift, this massive uncertainty and crisis. And I still have more hope for our workplaces to get that act together, because it is held within these institutions and structures.
Yeah.
It seems almost even...
Well, you can create more structure in a workplace, because a workplace is not a family, it's a team.
Right. So
and there's a hierarchical structure where somebody can dictate to you.
Right.
Well, and if your coworker or your employee is a real dick or like steals your wallet, you can fire them.
You can.
Your
You can
brother
get rid of
your
them.
brother does that. You're like, God damn it, you stole my wallet.
Yep.
What the hell?
That's
You're,
right.
you're stuck with them. You're still blood related to that person.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's
Yeah,
fair.
It's almost like parenting is decentralized. Families are more decentralized, so the ability to introduce systematic solutions is a lot harder. But then I see how actually empowering leaders and managers at work to gain these skills is a solution to how we then apply, to how that spills over, and hopefully more than trickles down into families and into homes.
I think the answer to this is not always structure. It's not always even a scaffolding to an existing structure. I think we've lost the passion for just loving chaos. I love chaos. I absolutely do. And in the chaos of raising each one of my teenage daughters, who are very different in that phase that comes with some intrepidation if you're a dad. It's like, oh, it's coming. Daddy's little girl is turning into a demon, where I can't do anything right? Where everything I say seems to have been an irritant, right?
How many boys do you have versus
One.
girls? One boy.
One boy, 3 girls, 1 boy. Jonas is my youngest. He's my youngest. He's 17.
Wow.
And my oldest is 32.
Nice.
So they cleared the path.
You know, he was influenced by them greatly.
Sure.
Right. His level of empathy is way better than I was when I was his age.
Amazing.
Thank God.
Yeah, but that's the influence of his mom and his sisters were great in that fashion.
Sure.
So, that's
He'll,
not
he'll make a great boyfriend for somebody.
Yeah. No, I think he's a conscientious kid. You know,
Yeah.
and so not a platitude to my family. That's actually who they are. You know, so I think in raising kids, we long immediately. How do I get some structure on this? Because I'm not sleeping, I'm irritable,
Yeah.
I'm not shaking my babies, but I get it, right? I mean, all of those things that just feed this thing, right? And then in the workplace, we have the same thing where it's like that one person. It's like, geez, how come every time I meet with them, they're so caustic about it, right? How can I reach them so that I'm hitting them at a level where we can talk together about that problem over the fence instead of always being across the fence, like, you know, throwing pitchforks at each other, right? And in that chaos, we're sometimes too quick to put some structure on that,
Sure.
which then it inevitably builds a fence and a higher fence,
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That structure only usually is driven by, in this structure, I'm above you,
Right.
you know? And that's, I think, living the chaos a little bit longer. You know, sometimes
Yeah.
we're lucky enough to trip over the truth, and the humility is, or wisdom is, stay down a little bit longer. Don't be so anxious to
Yeah.
get back up.
Yeah.
right?
Reed Hastings has this thing he talks about with his company before Netflix, and ultimately why he says it failed, which is some problem would come up, and so then to prevent that problem from coming up again, they would create another rule, and another rule, and they got really process dense. And the problem is the only kind of people that really want to work in a hyper-structured, process-dense place are the people that are not your most innovative and creative.
Yeah.
Your most talented people, the ones that take the big risks, the ones that up-level while you want to scale, those people need some freedom and flexibility.
They do.
And so instead
Chaos.
at Netflix, it was like they made that whole like culture deck that really blew up, but it was more about responsibility and how do we build minimum structure for the culture that we want to have here that empowers people to take responsibility and have flexibility.
Yeah.
And so like figuring out what's the right amount of structure for the kind of culture you want to build to then empower people to be the highest performing within your workplace.
I really love that. I really do. The minimum amount of structure that is required. Structure is required. You can't just say, to hell with structure.
Right.
Right? And you can't love chaos that much. You're just a crazy person. Right? So I love that. What is the minimum level of structure for us to succeed as a creative human ingenuity, manifesting tools to be tools, not
Yes.
the end game.
Yes.
Right? Love that. Love that.
And-
I'm gonna steal that.
And
Please do.
You're coaching tons of leaders and people, right?
I am. I'm coaching a lot. Yeah, I am doing a lot of coaching. Honestly, I've always been that guy.
Yeah.
Right.
What's your style? How are you? And also, how do you manage across so many different teams? And you said you were flying from here to there. to
Yeah, I'm
dropping-
not. The honest answer is that we haven't figured this piece out yet.
Okay.
And we're going to figure it out. And that's my charge and mandate. Certainly is how do we look at this problem? How do we scale? Right. The conundrum is not scaling because platforms will offer you that.
Sure.
Third-party platforms are also removed from the authenticity.
Sure.
Right? And so what happens, it's not, they're well-meaning. You bring in a third-party coach and platforms, they're well-meaning. They have good experience, maybe very insightful, but there's a whole big portion that they don't know what mud your boots are walking through, right? That make it a little bit less applicable and maybe a little bit less faster on the trust route, right? And so my approach is, I love the one-on-one coaching, right? I love to figure out what is it that you want out of this first, right? You have to put it on them. They have to own it. I can't lead them, right? I just have to make them, help them think about things a little bit differently, right? Which sounds like, I don't know, reading palms. It sounds like that. It's a little bit better than that, I think. God, I hope it is.
Can you read palms?
No, I can't. But I can read the back of knees. That's my gift. Yeah.
Matthew,
Yeah.
can you show him your knee real quick?
I just made that shit up. I cannot read anything. I have an intuitive sense, right? Right when I started the company, I started with the company October 10th of this last year. So I'm relatively new. I started as an executive coach, and I got there, and every Friday they had this thing called Coffee Talk for the agency. The agencies are are thousands of contractors, right? And they have a moment, an hour at the end of each week where they got together and they heard, talked, all that kind of stuff. And this guy that was in charge of it, beautifully, wonderfully intelligent, smart man. Shout out to Zohar if you're listening. He said, hey, this Friday, this is a Wednesday. He said, this Friday we have this thing at this company called Coffee Talk. I want you to take it over and talk about something. So, WTF, right? I didn't initialize it then. And it was just like, I don't even know the company. I don't even know what they hear. Like, what am I going to speak on? Of course, my answer to him was like, okay, I'll give it a go, right? So Friday comes around, Thursday night comes around, and I'm laying down. I start to lay down. I'm a go to bed at 2 guy, right?
Nice.
2 a.m. Right. So I finally lay down. The house is quiet after 10:30, so I love that time, right? And I lay down, and that little wash of anxiety came. I said, well, I have actually got to be on the mic tomorrow. What the hell am I going to say? It's one thing to respond to what you guys are asking me.
Right.
That I can do all day.
Right.
But to actually create, and they're looking at me like, what content do you have for us? So I decided everything you needed to learn in the workplace, you learned in Texas Hold'em. I love to play Texas Hold'em. So all those attributes of position, where on the table are you? Are you in a position of power, right? What kind of bet? How do you calibrate the size of the pot with the strength of your hand? And what are you going to bet? And how do you read people enough to push them because you know you've got it? Or push them because you know you don't, right? The bluff. And so I just started working out at like 2 a.m. Oh, look at these parallels. Reading people, position, understanding your position. This is not the time to 3-bet, right? I mean, all of those things, and it just kind of worked out. And the people, I had a lot of things worked out by the morning, right? But I only needed half of them because all the other poker players, and they started coming, and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Fantastic. And I thought, that's it, right? I added too much structure. It created some anxiety because I didn't have it. But all I needed to do was apply something fun that is also real to the workplace so that you could see that, oh, these are the same dynamics. And maybe they string those two together, and the next time they go, oh, I'm running a marathon. Oh, that has an application to work. Oh, I'm riding my bike. That has an application. I'm raising a teenager. That has application to work. And these are the collective experiences that we gather that by the time we're 58, we look back and go, oh, that's why I couldn't do this at 25.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to be my own CEO at 25.
Yeah.
That's bullshit. Right? Very special kids could do it. Right? Special kids that are like at 16, they get the whole economy of numbers. And so that freakish talent, you're just going to be like, we're going to bank on that for a bit. We're going to ride that pony because they see the world in numbers, right? And maybe you count those gifts for a bit. But it's the aggregate, right? It's taken me a long time to collect these things.
What's one piece of advice you would have given to that 25-year-old self?
Man, easy. I don't know how I would have done it, but I would if I could go back.
Yeah.
If I could Back to the Future this, right? Get in my DeLorean and get back to that
Yeah.
time where Karl Thomsen was 25. I'd say to him, hey, let the anger go. Let the anger go. I fought everything. I grew up in a very contentious environment, and I was pissed off about it.
Sure.
Why did the world hand me these deck of cards? I have these talents, this intellect, this thing. I can do a lot of things, but I'm just hampered because I don't have a safety net. And honestly, when I look back, not having a safety net has been my number one best attribute. I've had to dig, and I know the value of not making it, and I know the impetus that when you don't have a safety net, you don't have options, right? Like if it was fine that I ate ramen for 3 weeks, right? It was fine if I was, making it that way, right? So if I could go back to my 25-year-old self, I'd be like, get rid of the anger. This is what's going to hamper you for the next 10 years, Karl.
How did you eventually let go of the anger?
Modeling from other people that were around me was incredibly powerful. I'm going to say something that's going to sound impressive, and it's not. And I want to say this ahead of time because once I say it afterwards, people don't listen to it. And so I'm saying right now, it's not as impressive as it sounds, but I've gotten 7 degrees in college. My curiosity is there. My intellectual capacity is decent, right? I'm a decently smart bloke. However, my Peter Pan-ness of not wanting to leave the university was because my intellect is where I found safety, and the people I met provided modeling that I otherwise were not it wasn't known to me. I would go home, like I had to get special permission to stay in the dorms over Christmas. I didn't know where to go. And then eventually I made friends who would be like, no, come here, come home to us.
Yeah.
I'd be watching their parents and be like, oh, yeah, there was none of that.
Yeah,
like, oh, this is how people behave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I started eating that up,
Yeah.
right? And when I realized that the amount I was consuming in observational skills was far away from the way I was able to behave still, then it's therapy.
Yeah.
Right? Lots of therapy. So, and my goal in therapy was like, not get rid of this or be better at this. I honestly, gosh, what was her name? I can see her face. She was so powerful for me. She offered all of her therapy. She was a psychiatrist, and she offered it on the house.
Wow.
It was pro bono. And in those sessions, what I told her, she said, "What do you want to get out of this?" I was like, "I want to find who I am and not be hurt by it." And that's what I wanted to do. And I stayed in universities because of that. And I had to invent other degrees, right? Because you can't just get the same, right? So it sounds impressive to get, all these little things and collect, but we all collect those things that compel us to go, wait, I feel something here. This is something good. I've got a guy, a very good friend of mine now that used to be, a student of mine, Greg Scruggs. I'm going to shout out to Greg, who's now defensive line coach for the Jets. Has
Awesome.
2 Super Bowl rings. Didn't play football until a senior in high school. That's a great
Wow.
He was the marching band. playing
Oh,
drums,
yeah.
Right? Great guy. And what I love about Greg's story is that he never counted on a safety net. He always faced his fears, and he understands that so naturally, right? He just gets that piece. Those are the people that change the world.
Yeah.
Because they mean it, right? You mean it. You can look someone in the, I can look at my son straight in the eyes and go, dude, let's go, right? And he knows what that means, right? Same with my daughters. They get the authenticity of who we are as people, which means they also know how bad I am at some shit, right? Right? And that's the thing we don't want people to know, but I'm bad at some shit. I really am.
Yeah, but you know that I want to discover who I am and not be hurt by it.
Yeah.
For me, I don't feel like I actually began to feel like I really discovered who I was, or really began that road of not being hurt by it before I started really allowing people to see things I was bad at. And the things that I felt the most shame around. And that it's actually like those things are really interconnected, like an accepting
are.
of like, oh, I've been bad at some shit. Oh, I've done some bad shit. Oh, other people will love me even though I've done that. Oh, maybe I can love myself
Yeah.
even though I've done
Right.
that. It's like, oh, maybe I don't need to be hurt
That's
by this
right.
bad shit. Maybe I don't have to be as terrified of some of the other bad shit that's to come.
Yeah. And the next permutation is that, oh, I can allow joy in.
Yeah.
Like unadulterated joy. I don't mean the joy that's like, oh, I'm so happy we won the game.
Right.
Whatever the hell that is, right?
Yeah.
But it's that point in life where I think in most days of my life, I wake up and I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of people will say to me things like, hey, man, what's your deal?
Yeah.
Or
Why are you
so
smiling?"
happy, right? I'm going to tell you this one great story. I won't mention names because that won't be fair. But there's an old school of coaching and an old school of conducting. Bobby Knight,
Yeah.
Toscanini, Gunther Herbig, right? These guys that were highly dictatorial, right? And I remember one time we were at the Yale School of Music. We're playing, I think, the Marvelous Mandarin. Doesn't matter. A piece, complicated, incredibly exceptional players playing it. And a lot of the strings were of my ilk, Korean. And at one point he stopped, this guy. He's German. He was like, why are you Koreans always smiling? Stop smiling. Right? And I just thought, what the hell? Right? Like, what's going on there? And I understand, I think what he was after, maybe the piece had an intensity that didn't require smiling, or I don't know. Right? I don't know. Who knows? How can you get in the brain of a Bobby Knight? Right? But I think a lot of people will examine me in that way, like, oh, his life must have been so good. That's why he can be joyful. They have no idea the abject pain I have gone through, right? And why I'm joyful is intentional. Like I've created a space through a lot of pain, through a lot of facing my own demons, that allowed that space to have joy. If you're not vulnerable, I mean, if you start to be vulnerable today, it may take you 5 to 10 years to feel that joy. Yeah. Because you got a lot of demons to face.
But it's worth it.
Absolutely worth it.
You can't selectively numb emotions.
Yeah.
You can't. You know, and if you want to be Dead Poet Society and suck the marrow out of the bone, if that's the person you want to be, it costs. It costs facing your demons, right?
Yeah.
That's the high cost.
Yeah. Emotions, we're conditioned for emotions to feel so uncomfortable, and we have to suppress them so deep that we bury them in our basements and our attics, and we seal it up.
Locked away.
Locked away. The key is lost in space with double encrypted. You're not getting that, like, no matter how much Bitcoin
No,
is in
that's
there.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And now, how many of those emotions are locked away permanently? You can't be angry without people saying it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting.
I actually can be angry, and that doesn't mean I'm an angry person. It
Right.
doesn't characterize me in my essence.
Right.
But I'm angry about that. I should be able to demonstrate that. Now, not at the point of hitting you guys.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
Yeah, well,
taking you down.
the
right?
thing with anger is anger is perceived injustice, and
No, that's right.
right, it's perceived
right.
injustice. And the thing is, when we don't have a relationship with actually processing emotions, we haven't built that capacity, or we've just locked them away for some reason. It's like our psyche needs to put them somewhere, and so we blame someone else for them. Sometimes we even just blame ourselves, and then that injustice is the fact that I have to be experiencing that pain, and then that anger is there. But so often, that like chronic anger that we held on to, and I was angry for a long time.
Were you?
For a really long time.
Yeah, I don't see any residual of that. Kudos to you, buddy. Yeah.
It's a lot. It took me years. You know, when I really first started meditating, it was like I was so critical and mean to myself up here, and I was a overachiever and overfunctioner. But like I wanted to like dominate, and there was this like that piece of me, and what I found was the anger was a bodyguard for grief,
Yeah.
over and over
Absolutely.
and over again.
Oh, man,
and
that's
it's like
so
once
right.
I could feel the grief, it's like,
No, I love
oh,
that.
now
Anger
I'm
was the
good.
bodyguard for yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're right. That sense of injustice, right, consumes you.
Yeah.
Whether you perceive it to be the application to yourself or to others, sometimes we project.
Yeah, and it's helpful, right?
It
It's
is.
great. If there is an injustice that you want to act on, great. Anger is a great fuel. The challenge is when it becomes this unintentional process where I don't know how to feel that thing, so I'm just going to put it away. And now this anger is coming up because it's actually trying to propel you.
Yeah.
The action it's trying to propel is you turning inward and processing the stuff.
Yeah.
But anger's a great thing. That's how we.
It is a good thing.
We,
Yeah.
we
I
can
had-
fight injustice.
I had typically too much of a great thing in my 20s.
Yeah.
In more ways than one, but we're talking about anger right now.
Yeah. I had a really interesting relationship with anger. My dad held on to so much of that chronic anger that it ended up turning into multiple sclerosis for him.
I think I cannot disbelieve that.
Yeah.
Right? I can't.
Yeah, he held.
can't.
He would share. He passed in 2012, my senior year of college. But throughout my childhood, he would bring up these characters who wronged him 30 years ago that he would like want to beat up and like write a letter to. And he'd write the letter and give it to my mom. My mom would obviously not send it. 'Cause she's
Yeah,
like,
right.
This is not going to serve anyone.
No.
But I saw how that anger completely consumed him, and it permeated so deeply into his nervous system that it literally like deteriorated his body and it turned on himself. And meanwhile, my mom,
Reverend
bless her-
Dimsdale, Scarlet Letter.
Oh yeah,
Outer manifest the inner turmoil.
Right.
Yeah, same lesson.
Right. My mom has a very healthy relationship with anger. She can let it rip. But I would suppress it. I was not willing. Yeah. And I suppressed that, and then I suppressed the sadness and the grief of my childhood and my upbringing, and I didn't feel like I had permission to express any of my emotion. And it wasn't until I started to pull on, and even before that, I had this joy and positivity that sometimes could turn toxic, where I would even gaslight myself to not actually claim my own anger and my own sadness. It wasn't until I started to pull on those threads and crack the dam open, what my friends would say is like crack the faucet, because once it started to come out, I was actually really good and fluent at at letting it flow out of me to the point where I would feel my whole nervous system, my brain, my heart, my spine light up and release this stored, suppressed emotion.
Love that.
Yeah, it was
I love that.
really crazy.
You know, high school was a particularly terrible time, right?
Yeah.
I didn't like high school. I didn't understand when people passed me in the hallway when they said, "What's up?" I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Was I supposed to answer that? I didn't.
Yeah.
I was just out of touch, right? And I was in my own world, and I was in a lot of pain, and so I just didn't like high school at all. But the people that I've seen since high school, from that high school, which is very few, they don't recognize me. I was so angry and bottled up. I just looked like a different person. I had a different.
Wow.
I had a different
released.
countenance.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's funny that people up till probably 19 years old, right? If I run into them that knew me 19 years old and earlier, they're just like, dude, what? I didn't even know that was you, right?
Wow.
And it's not like I'm extremely obese from that point or extremely skinnier or, you know, some kind of physical change. I used to be blonde, you know, I'm Korean, right? I was never tall. I didn't shrink, you know, all of those things. They're just not recognizable. One of the people that stuck out, Becky Thomsen, my name is Karl Thomsen. So she was next to me and we used to do lockers alphabetically.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I saw Becky in some random mall in San Antonio some year that I went back to San Antonio that, you know, I just ran into her. I recognized her right away. Oh, there's Becky. A little older, right? But there's Becky. Hey, Becky. She just looked at me like, who the hell are you? We were in the same homeroom, you know, like all of
Lockers
that.
right next to each
And then
other.
she was like, oh my God, Karl, I didn't even recognize you. That's funny. Wow. Right? That's some shit.
Some shit.
Yeah. But we digress to talking about me. I want to feel a little bit.
No.
No, please. When thinking about the joy and the living life like today matters, and that we are allowed to have our full scope of experiences. One of the things I want to land this conversation into is, why'd you come here? Why yes to a conversation about these sort of things with some kooky guys you met at a lunch?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Again, we're back to that. You meet that kid that's a friend of your kid, you know, and in the first 30 seconds you go, something is lining up in the eyes and the way we're connecting, right? There was a tall brunette lady with a white blouse.
Yeah, Sydney.
And you two, I just thought, something's here. Let's go for it. And I never fear those things.
Yeah.
One, I don't mind speaking extemporaneously, so that helps with the comfort level. But I also think I don't mind speaking that because I'm pretty confident the rest of my life supports what I'm going to say, right? Like I tried to be that guy. And so when I met you guys, I thought, that's funny. And I went back to the office and our little cubicle that we were using, because we're not only one guy's from New York, right?
Yeah.
And we're in that cubicle, and I said, I'm going to be on a podcast, you know? And it was like, and Matan, I think he was the one that looked at me and goes, yeah, that sounds about right. You know, so I think I'm that guy in a lot of ways, but I always seize that moment when I connect with someone I know it's deeper than what time should allow, right? Not everything's temporal, not everything is linear, and sometimes you connect. One of those more powerful moments for me was my interview at Invisible with the founder, Francis Pedraza, who is exceptionally brilliant man, but there's something in his eyes that we connected about, right? And I got that spirit. And it doesn't matter if later on you discover that there's not alignment on everything, that doesn't matter. If we could leverage that, right? If people were authentic enough to recognize that and it became a little bit more wider in scope, I think you just have a very different workplace and a very different world. How different would New York be?
Amen.
Yeah, it would be extremely different. It's great, right?
Karl, thanks for coming. This was a ton of fun.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. Thanks for having me. I mean, I could throw that same question to you. Like, why the hell did you look at this little 5'8" gray-haired Korean and go, hey, let's get this guy?
We have a deep trust in our own intuition and in each other's. And Matthew just looked at me. He's like, "We have to get Karl on the podcast."
Is that right?
And I know to trust that and be like, "Oh, okay, let's get Karl on the podcast."
Well, Sydney and I were standing there and we were like, oh, who else should go in the interview? And then you were locked in We were like, he looks pretty locked in. And then you took your headphones off.
Uh-huh.
And you were like, and you just were in our energy immediately.
I was, right away.
You were dancing and playing
Yeah.
with it. When it was,
Yeah.
And you came around.
Yeah.
We felt the vibe. And then you were like, I'm a coach and a people leader. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was incredible. Like all I did was eat your lunch, which I enjoyed, and I wanted to make sure I showed gratitude. I wanted to find out who was back there and say, thanks. We do this with our team every sync on Monday. We have an hour sync, and the last 15 minutes is like, what are we grateful for?
Yeah.
Because it displaces what we become ungrateful for.
Right.
And I practice that with them. It sounds corny, sounds cheesy, but
It's important.
actually been a pretty important exercise.
Yeah.
So in that light, I'm grateful for you guys.
It's
Because
mutual.
you've also reminded me of a couple of things that sometimes are easy for me to forget about myself and where I should be and what I should do. So I'm grateful for that. I really am.
Mutually.
Cool shit.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.